started on a cold, lonely night. I had just wrapped up a grueling double shift at work. My back ached, my feet felt like lead, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. The thought of the warm blankets waiting for me was the only thing keeping me going as I trudged to my car, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into my bones. The highway stretched endlessly before me, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional glow of passing streetlights. The air was chilly, sending a slight shiver down my spine, despite the heater running on low. The empty road felt eerie, as if I was the only soul traveling through an infinite void of darkness. At first, it was peaceful. The only sounds were my favorite playlist and the hum of the engine. But then, around midnight, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. A car had appeared out of nowhere, following close behind. I brushed it off as another traveler, but as the miles passed, the car stayed uncomfortably close, matching every turn I made. I thought I was imagining things until I slowed down, hoping they'd pass me, but instead, they slowed down too. My unease turned to dread when I decided to pull into a gas station. The car followed, parking a few spaces away. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured his face. He lingered by his car, watching me. I pretended not to notice and went inside the store. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a bottle of water and paid at the counter. When I turned around, he was standing just outside the door, staring directly at me. I bolted to my car and sped off. To my horror, the headlights appeared again in my rearview mirror, closer this time. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't go home and risk leading him there. Instead, I turned onto a forest road I knew well and switched off my lights, pulling into a hidden dirt path. I held my breath, hoping he'd drive past. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in silence. Just when I thought I was safe, I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. Then, a shadow appeared by my driver's side window. I froze.
"You can't hide forever,"
a low voice whispered. I don't remember how I found the courage, but I slammed on the gas, tearing out of there as fast as I could. The man didn't follow, but I didn't stop until I reached a police station. The officers found no sign of the car or the man. To this day, I never take late-night drives alone. When I first moved into the apartment, it felt like a dream come true. The place had charm, high ceilings, vintage fixtures, and a large window that bathed the room in sunlight. The rent was surprisingly cheap, but I chalked it up to the building's age. Everything seemed perfect, until the noises started. At first, it was faint scratching sounds coming from the walls. I thought it might be rats and called the landlord, but he dismissed it, saying the building was old and had quirks. Then, late one night, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the closet. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the pipes. But the sound had an unsettling rhythm, almost like deliberate tapping, growing louder and more insistent, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. It echoed through the quiet apartment, sending chills down my spine and making the air feel heavy with unease. But as the nights went on, the tapping grew louder and more deliberate, almost like someone was knocking from the inside. One evening, while cleaning, I accidentally knocked over a box in the closet. As I bent down to pick it up, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a key, taped to the back wall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started searching the apartment. I eventually found a hidden door behind the bookshelf. The key fit perfectly. When I opened it, I discovered a small, windowless room with a single chair bolted to the floor. There were deep scratches on the walls, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I reported it to the landlord, who seemed oddly unfazed. That's when I started doing some digging. I found old news articles about a woman who had disappeared, the previous tenant. Her friends reported she complained about someone watching her and hearing noises at night. The police suspected foul play, but no evidence was ever found. I moved out the next day, but the image of that chair and those scratches still haunt me. Sometimes, I wonder if the tapping I heard was her trying to warn me. Mark and I had been best friends since grade school. We did everything together, from bike rides to playing video games. But there was one place we never went, his basement. It wasn't forbidden, exactly, but his parents made it clear that it was off limits. One summer afternoon, curiosity got the better of us. His parents were out, and we decided to sneak down and see what the big deal was. At first, it looked like any old basement, a few boxes, old furniture, and some tools. But then we noticed a trap door in the corner. It was partially hidden under a rug, as if someone didn't want it to be found. We pried it open and found a small room underneath. The air that escaped was damp and reeked of mildew, mixed with an underlying metallic tang that made my stomach churn. The walls were rough, covered in patches of peeling paint and dark stains that looked like dried rust, or something worse. The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended, the chill biting into our skin. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, but there were unmistakable footprints leading to a corner, as if someone had been there recently. It felt like the room was holding its breath, watching us, waiting for something to happen. There was a single chair in the center, with heavy restraints bolted to the floor. The walls were covered in faded Polaroid photos. My stomach turned as I looked closer. The photos were of different people, all sitting in the same chair, their faces twisted in fear. We heard the front door slam upstairs. Mark's dad was home. Panicking, we scrambled back upstairs and tried to act normal, but he knew. The look on his face when he saw us told me everything. He grabbed Mark by the arm and hissed,
What did I tell you about the basement?
I made an excuse to leave, my heart pounding. That night, Mark called me, his voice shaking.
We're moving.
He said,
Dad said it's not safe here anymore.
They were gone by morning. Years later, I saw a true crime documentary about a suspected serial killer who targeted small towns. When they showed sketches of his basement setup, it was identical to Mark's. I used to work as a delivery driver for a food app. Most nights were uneventful. Just the monotony of navigating winding roads and the occasional amusing encounter with eccentric customers. But one night, everything changed. I got an order for a house at the end of a long, rural road. The location was miles away from the main town, deep in an area where streetlights were scarce, and the surrounding woods seemed to close in on you as you drove. The GPS struggled to find the exact address, rerouting me multiple times before I finally pulled up in front of an old, decrepit house. The place looked like it had been plucked straight out of a horror movie. Paint peeled from the siding, shutters hung crookedly, and the overgrown lawn swallowed the narrow path leading to the door. The house was in complete darkness, save for a faint glow coming from a window on the second floor. I thought about calling the customer to confirm I was at the right place, but when I checked my phone, there was no signal. Shaking off a sense of unease, I grabbed the order and walked up to the door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each sound echoing unnaturally in the still night. I rang the doorbell, and after a long moment, the door creaked open to reveal an elderly man. He was thin, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes, but his warm smile offset his otherwise gaunt appearance.
Oh, it's for my granddaughter.
He said in a gentle voice, his tone carrying a hint of gratitude.
Come in while I get my wallet.
I hesitated. Something about the man seemed off, but his demeanor was disarming, and I didn't want to seem rude. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The interior was stark, almost clinical. The walls were bare, save for faint water stains and cracks spidering out from the corners. There were no signs of life, no family photos, no knickknacks, no furniture aside from a single chair by the door.
Just a moment,
the man said, disappearing into another room. His footsteps receded down a hallway, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. I stood there awkwardly, clutching the delivery bag and glancing around. The more I observed, the more the emptiness of the place unsettled me. Minutes passed, then more. The man didn't return. I called out, "Sir, are you okay?" My voice sounded small in the cavernous space. No response. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I set the bag down and stepped cautiously toward the hallway. The light from the front door barely reached the adjoining room, and the darkness seemed to swallow every step I took. The hallway was empty. A door at the far end stood slightly ajar, faint moonlight spilling through a cracked window inside. I pushed the door open, but the room was empty. No elderly man, no furniture, nothing. Just peeling wallpaper and dust motes, floating in the pale light. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound of breathing, shallow and erratic, coming from behind me. I whipped around, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears as I backed away toward the front door. Suddenly, a young woman burst out of a closet by the door, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed my arm with a strength that belied her slight frame.
"You need to leave now,"
she hissed. Before I could process what was happening, she yanked me toward the door.
"Don't ask questions.
She whispered, her voice trembling.
Just go."
We bolted outside, the night air sharp against my skin. As we reached the driveway, I glanced back at the house. The upstairs window where I had seen the faint glow was now dark, but the front door, which I was sure we had closed behind us, stood wide open. Shadows moved inside, but there was no one there. Or at least, no one I could see. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The woman's face was pale, her breathing ragged.
"That house has been abandoned for years,"
she said.
People who go inside don't come out. I've been investigating it after reports of disappearances in the area. You were lucky I was here tonight."
My stomach dropped as her words sank in. I stared at the house, my mind racing. What would have happened if she hadn't been there? Who was the man I had spoken to? And more importantly, what had he planned for me? The woman handed me a flashlight and gestured toward my car.
"Go now, and whatever you do, don't look back."
I didn't argue. I scrambled into my car, heart pounding as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the rural road, glancing in the rearview mirror despite her warning. The house stood in the distance, its dark silhouette fading into the night. But as I turned a corner, I saw it, the faint outline of the elderly man standing at the edge of the driveway, watching me leave. I quit my job the next day. After the whirlwind of moving into my new duplex, I thought I could finally relax and settle into my life. The place wasn't much, just a modest 2-story unit on a quiet street, but it was mine. The landlord, Mr. Grayson, was an older man in his 60s. He had a peculiar way about him, polite, but with an intensity in his eyes that made it hard to tell if he was being friendly or just scrutinizing me. He'd mentioned during our initial meeting that he preferred to handle all maintenance himself, boasting about his handiwork. At first, I didn't think much of it. The first week was uneventful, save for the occasional thump from the other side of the duplex where Mr. Grayson lived. One evening, as I was settling into bed, there was a knock at my door. It was him, holding a toolbox.
"I just need to check the pipes under your kitchen sink,"
he said. It was almost 10 p.m., but he insisted it was urgent. Reluctantly, I let him in, watching as he fiddled with the pipes for an unusually long time. Finally, he left, but the whole encounter left me feeling unsettled. Why had it been so urgent? Over the next few weeks, Mr. Grayson's visits became more frequent.
"Just checking the wiring."
He'd say one day.
"Routine inspection."
He'd mutter another. I tried to be understanding, but it was becoming invasive. Then came the night I woke up to find him standing in my bedroom. The soft creak of the floorboards jolted me awake. There he was, silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlight streaming through the blinds. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, trying to make sense of what I was seeing.
"I heard something,"
he said, his voice low and unconvincing. His eyes darted around the room, refusing to meet mine.
"Just making sure you're safe."
I didn't know what to say. My throat felt dry, and every instinct screamed at me to get him out. "You can't just come in here," I stammered. He didn't respond. Instead, he gave me a strange, tight-lipped smile before turning and leaving the room. I locked the door behind him, trembling, and stayed awake until morning. The next day, I changed the locks. It gave me a fleeting sense of security, but that evening, I noticed something was off. The furniture in my living room had been slightly rearranged. My coffee table was at an odd angle, and one of the kitchen drawers was ajar. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been inside. When I confronted Mr. Grayson about it, his response was unnerving. He didn't deny it. Instead, he just smiled that same tight-lipped smile and said,
"This is my house. I can go where I please."
Anger and fear coursed through me. "You can't just come in without my permission. It's illegal."
"Illegal?"
He repeated, almost amused.
"You're a tenant. You're staying in my space."
The way he said it, with an edge of possessiveness, made my stomach churn. That night, I slept with a chair wedged under the doorknob and my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Days later, I began to notice other oddities. Scratches on the floor near the vents, like something heavy had been dragged. A faint, musty smell that seemed to come and go, and then the sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the walls late at night. I told myself it was just the old pipes, but deep down, I knew better. One evening, I decided to investigate. I started in the basement, a cluttered, dimly lit space filled with cobwebs and forgotten tools. As I moved a stack of boxes, I uncovered something that made my blood run cold. A hidden door. It was small and partially camouflaged by the wooden paneling. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside was a narrow passageway, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air was damp and carried the faint scent of decay. I grabbed a flashlight and crawled in, my heart pounding with every inch. The passage led to a small, concealed room between the walls. Inside were a worn cot, a stack of notebooks, and a collection of small, personal items that didn't belong to me. Rings, watches, even a few photographs of people I didn't recognize. My stomach turned as I realized what I was looking at. Trophies. The sound of footsteps above snapped me out of my horror. Mr. Grayson was home. I quickly retreated, making sure to leave everything as it was. That night, I called the police and reported everything. They found enough evidence in that hidden room to arrest him. It turned out he had been spying on tenants for years, using the passageways to move through the duplex unnoticed. Some of the items they found belonged to people who had been reported missing. I moved out the next day, but the trauma lingered. Even now, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, as if Mr. Grayson's gaze still follows me wherever I go. When I moved into a small, rustic cottage on the outskirts of a rural town, it felt like the perfect retreat from city life. The cottage was surrounded by a dense forest, with the nearest neighbor miles away. I was told it had been vacant for years, but I saw this as a charm rather than a red flag. Peaceful, quiet, and immersed in nature, exactly what I needed to escape the chaos of my life. My first few days were idyllic. The mornings were serene, with sunlight streaming through the tall trees, and the evenings were calm, accompanied by the distant hoot of owls and the rustle of leaves. I spent my time unpacking and settling in, enjoying the solitude. The cottage was old but sturdy, with wooden beams and a stone fireplace that gave it a cozy feel. However, there was something odd about the bedroom window. It faced directly into the forest, and at night, it felt as though the trees themselves were watching me. I shook off the feeling, blaming it on my overactive imagination. On the fourth night, I was jolted awake by a soft tapping sound. It was faint at first, like the branches of a tree brushing against the glass. But as I lay in bed, holding my breath, the tapping became deliberate, a rhythmic, calculated knock. My heart pounded as I turned to look at the window. The moonlight streaming through the curtains cast eerie shadows across the room. Summoning my courage, I approached the window and pulled back the curtain. A face stared back at me. It was a man, his skin pale and waxy under the moonlight. His sunken eyes were fixed on mine, unblinking, and his lips were stretched into a chilling grin. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Then in an instant, he vanished, melting back into the darkness of the forest. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with all the lights on, gripping the fire poker like a lifeline. When the sun rose, I ventured outside to look for signs of the intruder. My stomach dropped when I found footprints in the dirt beneath the bedroom window. They were deep and unmistakable, leading into the woods. I called the local police, but they found no other evidence and assured me it was likely a prank. I tried to believe them, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Over the next few nights, the tapping continued. I tried everything to block it out, closing the curtains, wearing earplugs, but the sound always reached me. On the 5th night, I decided to confront him. Armed with a flashlight and the fire poker, I pulled back the curtains, only to find nothing but the darkness of the forest staring back at me. Relieved but uneasy, I returned to bed. Just as I was about to drift off, the tapping resumed, louder this time. The 6th night was the worst. The tapping escalated to pounding, shaking the window pane. I was too terrified to look, but the voice that followed shattered my resolve. It was soft, almost sing-song, and it sent chills down my spine.
You can't keep me out forever.
The words hung in the air, wrapping around me like a cold fog. I barely slept, every creak of the old cottage amplifying my fear. On the 7th night, I reached my breaking point. I packed my belongings in the dead of night, throwing them into my car without any semblance of order. As I loaded the last bag, I heard it again, the tapping, but this time it was coming from the car window. My blood turned to ice as I saw his face once more, inches away from mine. He wasn't smiling this time. His expression was blank, his eyes piercing and filled with something I couldn't name. I screamed, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. The car roared to life, and I sped down the narrow dirt road without looking back. When I reached the town, I went straight to the police station. They listened to my story with a mix of skepticism and concern, but their investigation turned up nothing. The cottage was exactly as I had left it, with no signs of forced entry or unusual activity. The footprints outside the window were gone, erased as if they had never existed. To this day, I've never returned to that cottage. I've tried to rationalize the experience, telling myself it was a prank, a bad dream, or my mind playing tricks on me. But every so often, when I'm alone at night, I hear that same faint tapping sound, and I'm reminded that some things can't be explained.